Israel challenged Iran's navy. Now Tehran just abandoned Hormuz. Iran had calculated that the Strait of Hormuz represented an unbreakable strategic choke point, a geographic fortress that could strangle global energy markets at will. However, Israel's naval operations in the Red Sea have exposed a vulnerability so catastrophic that Tehran has been forced to abandon its most powerful leverage point in modern history. On March 14, 2026, Iranian naval assets began a systematic withdrawal from forward positions around the Strait of Hormuz, retreating approximately 180 nautical miles eastward into deeper Persian Gulf waters. This maneuver, which the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy was forced to execute, is not a routine tactical repositioning. It represents the official collapse of decades of strategic doctrine, billions of dollars in coastal defense infrastructure, and Iran's primary deterrent against Western military intervention. The images you are about to see on your screens will demonstrate how modern naval warfare has fundamentally transformed the balance of power in the world's most critical energy corridor. What you see is not simply military hardware moving across water. These are the visual markers of a geopolitical earthquake that will reshape Middle Eastern power dynamics for the next decade. But that is not the most shocking detail. There are three interconnected factors that shattered Iran's Hormuz strategy and forced this unprecedented retreat. The first is Israel's deployment of autonomous underwater vehicles capable of mapping every Iranian coastal defense position without detection. The second is the systematic destruction of Iran's surveillance network through coordinated cyber and kinetic strikes. The third is the arrival of a multinational naval task force so overwhelming that Iranian commanders concluded engagement would result in total fleet annihilation. We will explain each of these factors in the later parts of the video. Now we must examine what happened in those critical 72 hours that changed everything. Now we descend to that first moment when it all began, to the waters of the Red Sea on March 11, 2026. According to reports from the Institute for the Study of War, Israeli SAR 6-class corvettes conducting routine patrol operations detected unusual electromagnetic signatures emanating from what appeared to be civilian cargo vessels transiting toward the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The Israeli Navy's intelligence division, operating in close coordination with U.S. Fifth Fleet assets based in Bahrain, identified these vessels as Iranian arms shipment platforms destined for Houthi forces in Yemen. The location you see referenced in the intelligence reports is approximately 180 kilometers north of the Bab el-Mandeb choke point, in international waters where Iranian vessels believed themselves beyond immediate Israeli reach. What Iran's naval command failed to calculate was the range and capability of Israel's newly deployed Gabriel 5 anti-ship missiles, weapon systems with a documented range exceeding 400 kilometers and terminal guidance so precise they can strike specific compartments within targeted vessels. On the night of March 12th, Israeli naval forces executed Operation Severance, a coordinated strike that eliminated 4 Iranian cargo vessels and severely damaged 2 escort frigates in a matter of 17 minutes. The technical execution of this operation reveals the enormous capability gap that has emerged between Israeli naval technology and Iranian defensive systems. Israel's Gabriel 5 missiles employ a combination of GPS guidance, inertial navigation, and active radar homing in their terminal phase, making them effectively immune to the electronic warfare countermeasures that form the backbone of Iranian naval defense doctrine. According to German intelligence reports analyzed by Defense Ministry officials, the Iranian frigates deployed their full suite of jamming equipment, chaff dispensers, and decoy systems, yet achieved 0 successful intercepts against the incoming missile barrage. The Gabriel 5 missiles adjusted their flight paths in real time, distinguished actual targets from decoys through advanced imaging correlation, and struck with precision that eliminated the vessel's capability to return fire or even transmit distress signals before catastrophic damage occurred. The immediate tactical result of Operation Severance was the elimination of an estimated 2,400 tons of advanced weaponry destined for Houthi forces, including 80 anti-ship missiles, 200 advanced drones, and sophisticated coastal defense radar systems. But the operational significance extends far beyond the material losses. Iran's naval doctrine for the Strait of Hormuz relies fundamentally on the assumption that Iranian forces can operate with relative impunity in international waters beyond the immediate reach of hostile naval powers. The doctrine presumes that the geographic advantages of operating from Iranian coastal positions, combined with the asymmetric capabilities of fast attack craft and missile batteries, create a defensive envelope that makes direct engagement prohibitively costly for adversaries. Operation Severance demolished this strategic assumption in a single night. Israeli forces demonstrated the capability to strike Iranian naval assets at ranges and with precision that Iranian defensive systems cannot counter, transforming the cost-benefit calculation for any future Iranian naval operations in the broader region. The strategic chain reaction that followed Operation Severance reveals how modern military technology can produce cascading consequences far exceeding the immediate tactical impact. Within 36 hours of the Red Sea strikes, Israeli intelligence units working in coordination with U.S. Cyber Command executed a systematic penetration of Iran's integrated coastal defense network along the Strait of Hormuz. According to preliminary data from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, this cyber operation compromised approximately 70% of Iran's coastal surveillance radars, communications relay stations, and fire control systems for shore-based anti-ship missile batteries. The cyber intrusion did not simply disable these systems temporarily. Israeli operatives inserted persistent malware that creates false radar returns, corrupts targeting data, and provides real-time intelligence on Iranian defensive postures directly to Israeli and allied naval forces. The result is that Iran's coastal defense commanders can no longer trust the information their sensors provide, cannot reliably coordinate fire control between dispersed battery positions, and must assume that every defensive measure they plan is already known to adversary forces before execution. The third element that forced Iran's withdrawal from Hormuz positions emerged on March 13th, when satellite imagery confirmed the arrival of what defense analysts are calling the largest peacetime naval concentration in the Persian Gulf since Operation Desert Storm. The multinational task force designated Combined Task Force 154, assembled in the waters between Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, consists of 47 major surface combatants, 8 attack submarines, and an estimated 12,000 naval personnel from 11 nations. The United States contributed 2 carrier strike groups centered on USS Gerald R. Ford and USS George H.W. Bush, each carrier accompanied by guided missile cruisers equipped with Aegis combat systems and destroyers, carrying a combined 1,200 vertical launch cells loaded with Tomahawk cruise missiles and SM-6 air defense interceptors. The United Kingdom deployed the carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth with its complement of F-35B stealth fighters. France contributed the carrier Charles de Gaulle. Japan, in an unprecedented move, deployed 2 helicopter destroyers that can operate F-35B aircraft, marking the first time Japanese naval aviation has projected power into the Middle East since World War II. But the truly devastating addition to Combined Task Force 154 came from an unexpected quarter. South Korea, responding to intelligence suggesting Iranian technology transfers to North Korea, deployed 3 Sejong the Great-class destroyers, each equipped with 128 vertical launch cells and some of the most sophisticated air defense radars in any navy worldwide. Australia contributed 2 Hobart-class destroyers with equally impressive sensor and weapon suites. The integration of these forces under unified command creates a defensive and offensive capability so overwhelming that Iranian naval commanders conducting METTC assessment using NATO methodology calculated that engagement with Combined Task Force 154 would result in complete destruction of Iran's surface fleet within 4 to 6 hours, with Iranian losses approaching 100% while inflicting minimal damage on the multinational force. This brings us to the most crucial development that transformed tactical naval operations into strategic geopolitical realignment. Iran's naval withdrawal from forward Hormuz positions represents the explicit acknowledgement that the Islamic Republic can no longer credibly threaten closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway through which approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil transit daily, representing roughly 21% of global petroleum consumption. For 4 decades since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, Iran's ability to threaten Hormuz closure has served as the cornerstone of its deterrent strategy against Western military intervention. The implicit bargain has always been clear. Any major attack on Iranian nuclear facilities, any attempted regime change operation, any significant military pressure on Tehran would trigger Iranian retaliation through Hormuz closure, creating global economic chaos that would force international pressure on any aggressor to cease operations immediately. The credibility of this deterrent rested on 2 foundations. First, the geographic reality that the Strait of Hormuz narrows to just 21 nautical miles at its tightest point, with navigable shipping channels only 2 miles wide, creating a target-rich environment where even relatively unsophisticated Iranian weapons could inflict significant damage on commercial shipping. Second, The assumption that Iranian coastal defenses, mobile missile launchers, swarm tactics using hundreds of fast attack craft, and mines deployed in shallow waters would impose costs on any clearing operation so high that Western powers would seek diplomatic resolution rather than military confrontation. Israeli operations in the Red Sea, the cyber penetration of coastal defenses, and the assembly of Combined Task Force 154 have systematically demolished both foundations. Iranian coastal defenses can be neutralized through cyber means without firing a shot. Iranian surface vessels can be eliminated at ranges where they cannot effectively return fire. Iranian mine-laying operations can be detected and countered through autonomous underwater vehicles operating continuously without the vulnerabilities of manned platforms. The strategic implications extend far beyond naval operations. According to analysis from Radio Free Europe reporters covering Iranian domestic politics, the withdrawal from Hormuz positions has triggered intense internal debate within Iran's security establishment about the viability of the Islamic Republic's entire strategic doctrine. The logic is devastatingly simple. If Iran cannot credibly threaten Hormuz closure, then Iran cannot deter Israeli or American strikes on its nuclear facilities. If Iran cannot deter such strikes, then the massive investment in nuclear infrastructure, estimated at over $100 billion across 4 decades, becomes vulnerable to elimination without Iran possessing effective retaliation options. This realization is forcing a fundamental reassessment within Tehran about whether the nuclear program provides security or actually increases vulnerability by inviting the very attacks Iran sought to prevent. The picture we see today is almost an exact replica of the strategic dilemma that faced Saddam Hussein's Iraq in 1990 and 1991. Hussein believed that his million-man army, chemical weapons stockpiles, and willingness to absorb casualties would deter international intervention even after the invasion of Kuwait. The assumption proved catastrophically wrong when Operation Desert Storm demonstrated that technological superiority could systematically dismantle conventional military forces with minimal friendly casualties. Iran now faces the same technological overmatch, the same strategic isolation, and the same dawning recognition that capabilities believed to provide security actually provide nothing but illusion. But we must understand the human dimension of this strategic collapse to grasp its full significance. The Iranian naval personnel ordered to withdraw from forward positions around Hormuz are not simply following routine orders. These are sailors who have spent their entire careers training for the defense of what Iranian strategic doctrine describes as the nation's most vital choke point, the geographic feature that supposedly guarantees Iranian security regardless of technological disadvantages in other domains. Radio Free Europe reporters conducting interviews with Iranian expatriate communities report accounts from family members describing the psychological impact of the withdrawal orders. One Iranian naval officer, speaking on condition of anonymity, described the retreat as admitting that everything we trained for, everything we believed about our ability to defend the homeland, was based on assumptions that technology has rendered obsolete. The civilian impact in Iranian coastal cities along the Strait of Hormuz reveals the broader social implications of strategic failure. The city of Bandar Abbas, home to Iran's primary naval base and approximately 600,000 residents, has experienced what local observers describe as a crisis of confidence in the government's competence. For decades, residents of Bandar Abbas have lived with the economic and security costs of hosting military facilities, accepting restrictions on movement, enduring the environmental impact of naval operations, and facing the risk of becoming targets in any future conflict, all based on the promise that these sacrifices were necessary to defend the nation's most critical strategic asset. The withdrawal suggests those sacrifices purchased nothing but empty promises. Iranian leadership faces a psychological trap from which no obvious escape exists. President Pezeshkian and Supreme Leader Khamenei can attempt to frame the withdrawal as a strategic repositioning, a temporary measure, or a tactical adjustment that preserves capability while avoiding unnecessary confrontation. But the Iranian population, particularly the educated urban middle class that follows international news and understands military realities, recognizes such framing as transparent propaganda. The alternative approach of admitting the strategic defeat honestly would acknowledge the fundamental failure of 40 years of defense policy and invite questions about what other regime claims rest on similar delusions. Either choice accelerates the erosion of government legitimacy that Iranian authorities can least afford during a period of economic crisis, social unrest, and intensifying international pressure. Looking forward, the coming months will determine whether Iran attempts to rebuild its Hormuz deterrent through new technologies and tactics, or whether Tehran concludes that the naval balance has shifted so dramatically that alternative strategies must be developed. Some Iranian strategic thinkers are reportedly advocating for a shift toward asymmetric capabilities that do not depend on conventional naval forces. This could include greater emphasis on cyber warfare, on supporting proxy forces throughout the Middle East, on accelerating the nuclear program to achieve breakout capability before Israeli or American strikes can prevent it. The danger of such a shift is that it could make Iran more unpredictable and potentially more willing to take risks in other domains, having lost confidence in its conventional deterrent capabilities. The Israeli perspective on these developments reveals careful calibration between exploiting the strategic advantage and avoiding escalation that could spiral into regional war. According to Israeli Defense Ministry sources speaking to Politico, the objective of Operation Severance and subsequent operations was not to provoke war with Iran, but to demonstrate capabilities that would deter future Iranian aggression, while reassuring Arab Gulf states that Israel can serve as a credible security partner. The challenge Israel faces is that successful deterrence requires Iran to believe that further escalation would be futile, while simultaneously avoiding actions so humiliating that Iranian leadership feels compelled to respond regardless of military logic simply to preserve domestic credibility. The involvement of Asian naval powers in Combined Task Force 154 represents a historic shift in Middle Eastern security architecture. Japan and South Korea sending major naval combatants to the Persian Gulf signals that the security of energy transit routes has become a truly global concern rather than primarily a Western interest. For decades, Asian economic powers benefited from secure energy flows guaranteed primarily by American naval presence while avoiding direct military involvement in Middle Eastern conflicts. The deployment of Japanese and South Korean destroyers to Combined Task Force 154 suggests a recognition that passive free-riding on American security guarantees is no longer sustainable or politically acceptable, particularly as the United States signals intention to focus more attention on China and the Pacific theater. The question that will define the next phase of this crisis is whether Iran possesses the institutional capability to abandon failed strategies and adopt new approaches, or whether the ideological rigidity of the Islamic Republic's leadership will lead to doubling down on ineffective policies. Wars are not only lost on the battlefield. Wars are lost at that breaking point when you wake up one morning and realize your money is worthless, your strategic doctrine was based on delusions, and your leaders lied to you about the country's true capabilities. Iran is racing toward that breaking point. The butter shortages that recently forced Iranian authorities to ration basic foodstuffs, the currency collapse that has seen the rial lose 80% of its value against the dollar since 2018, the youth unemployment that approaches 40%, and now the exposure of military vulnerabilities previously hidden behind propaganda, all combine to create a crisis of confidence in the regime's competence. The regional implications extend to every nation bordering the Persian Gulf. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and Oman have watched Iranian withdrawal from Hormuz positions with a mixture of relief and concern. Relief that the threat of Hormuz closure appears diminished, at least temporarily. Concern that a cornered and humiliated Iran might lash out in unpredictable ways, might accelerate the nuclear program, might intensify support for proxy forces, or might attempt spectacular terrorist operations to demonstrate continued relevance. The Arab Gulf states are caught between wanting to exploit Iranian weakness to extract diplomatic concessions and fearing that pushing too hard could trigger the very instability they seek to avoid. This scenario recalls the final years of the Soviet Union, when the communist superpower's inability to compete technologically and economically with the West became undeniable, forcing fundamental reassessment of strategic assumptions and ultimately contributing to the system's collapse. Iran's withdrawal from Hormuz positions represents a similar moment of forced confrontation with reality. The question is whether this recognition leads to rational policy adjustment and potential diplomatic openings, or whether it triggers increasingly desperate and dangerous actions by a regime that sees its survival threatened. So what can be expected in the coming period? Spring in the Persian Gulf brings calmer seas and clearer weather conditions ideal for naval operations. Combined Task Force 154 is not a temporary deployment. The multinational force will maintain continuous presence through at least the end of 2026, establishing a new normal where Iranian naval movements are subject to constant surveillance and where any Iranian attempt to threaten commercial shipping will face immediate and overwhelming response. Israel has demonstrated willingness to strike Iranian assets throughout the region when national security interests dictate. The cyber penetration of Iranian coastal defenses is not a one-time operation, but rather the establishment of persistent access that can be exploited whenever necessary. The technological trends favor continued widening of the capability gap between Israeli and allied forces on one side and Iranian forces on the other. Iran faces a choice between accepting diminished strategic position and seeking accommodation, or attempting escalation in hope of forcing a diplomatic reset. The danger of the escalation path is that Iran's conventional military options have been exposed as inadequate, potentially pushing Iranian decision-makers toward unconventional responses including terrorism, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, or even nuclear breakout if leadership concludes that only possession of nuclear weapons can restore deterrent credibility. The international community must navigate between maintaining pressure that could force Iranian behavioral change and providing diplomatic off-ramps that allow Iranian leadership to adjust policies without losing face so completely that regime survival appears to require continued confrontation. The abandonment of Hormuz forward positions marks the end of an era in Middle Eastern security dynamics. For 40 years, Iranian threats to close the strait served as the implicit backdrop to every major policy discussion involving Iran. That threat no longer possesses credibility. The exposure of this hollow deterrent creates both opportunities and dangers. The opportunity lies in potential for diplomatic breakthroughs if Iranian leadership recognizes that failed military strategies must give way to negotiated settlements. The danger lies in the possibility that desperate regimes take desperate actions. Only time will tell whether Iran chooses adaptation or continued confrontation. The Strait of Hormuz remains open, not because Iran chooses to keep it open, but because Iran no longer possesses the capability to close it against determined opposition. That represents a fundamental shift in the regional balance of power. Israel set out to eliminate Iranian weapons shipments to proxy forces. Instead, Israel exposed the fragility of Iran's entire strategic position. Tehran believed control of Hormuz guaranteed its security. Today, Iranian naval forces retreat eastward into deeper Persian Gulf waters, abandoning positions held for decades, confronting the reality that geography provides no protection against technological superiority. What are your thoughts on this strategic shift? Do you believe Iran will seek diplomatic accommodation or attempt escalation? Don't forget to share your thoughts on this topic in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like our video. The coming months will reveal whether Iranian leadership possesses the flexibility to abandon failed strategies, or whether ideological rigidity will drive continued confrontation despite military realities that offer no path to victory. At TGN, we will continue examining every development in this unfolding crisis that will shape Middle Eastern security for years to come. Presented by TGN. Thank you for choosing us.